Leadership Preparation Webinar Series: School Leaders' Role in Allocating School Resources to Support Student and School Needs, Part 1. The Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement is comprised of an executive director reporting to the Assistant State Superintendent, coordinators for school improvement, academic improvement, and leadership development, as well as leadership specialists. Our office has three main goals: fostering the growth of effective leaders, ensuring valid and reliable evaluations, and raising the quality of education. We provide targeted professional learning experiences and resources to equip current and future leaders with the skills and knowledge required for successful school and district leadership. We oversee the development and implementation of Maryland's teacher and principal evaluation system. Training, guidance, and support is provided to local school systems in the implementation of fair and valid evaluations. Lastly, we provide customized professional learning experiences and support informed by data and grounded in effective practices to improve school performance. To earn continuing professional development credit, in order to receive 1 credit, you must view 5 webinars, including Part 1 and Part 2. Additionally, you will complete 3 hours of experiences per webinar to include pre-work, participant guides with the webinar, and extension activities. In order to receive 2 CPD credits, you must watch all the webinars in this series, including Part 1 and Part 2. Then you will complete 3 hours of experiences per webinar to include any pre-work, participant guides with the webinar, and extension activities. In order to submit your materials, please complete the Google form found in the description below the video. Meet the presenters. For this presentation, we partnered with Wested and Associates, featuring Amy Evan, Senior Research Associate at Wested, and Jason Willis, Director of Strategy and Performance at Wested.
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Willis. I'm the Area Director for Strategic Resource Planning and Implementation here at Wested. I'm very glad to join you today to engage with you in this virtual leadership preparation webinar series. So let's start with some of our session objectives. What are the things that we're aiming to accomplish today and to support you as school leaders and as district leaders in the implementation of school improvement plans? First, that we want to ensure that you're thinking flexibly and creatively about the resources to support your priorities. Public education, we recognize that we don't necessarily have access to all the resources we wish we could provide to our students and children. However, we have resources that we could use in leveraging in creative ways to ensure that we support students. And so today is about offering some of those structures and guardrails and opportunities to think flexibly and creatively about those resources and how they can serve students. And in particular, really practice allocating operational resources. So not just human, such as time and talent and interaction with each other, but also financial, non-labor opportunities to engage with others at the school to kind of align those data with data-informed priorities. And the third objective for today is to ensure an opportunity of transparency of those resource allocation, that support needed improvements to ensure equity of outcomes drive resource allocation. That is to say that we are clear with ourselves and with our community about how resources are being developed and being implemented as a means to make sure that those resources are contributing to the equitable outcomes of ultimately every single one of the students that we serve on a daily basis. And so there's a couple of resources associated with today's session and module. We've got the participants agenda, as well as an operations alignment toolkit that you can use at your disposal kind of throughout the video to kind of pause, use the toolkit, come back to the video that would allow you to kind of fully engage in these series of activities that you're along with us on. And here on the screen, you can see the storage location for all of those resources you can access in Box to go along with it. One thing of note that each of these objectives are also aligned to one of the P cells. You can see those references here on the objectives, and really important for us as we partner with the Maryland State Department of Education at Wested to ensure the way that we're thinking about content is really aligned to expectations for leaders at the school and the district level in the state of Maryland. So let's get into it and lay a little bit of the foundation about where we're going into this work. So first, as a school leader, we think it's important to ask the question, what are the needs of your students? More broadly, what are the needs of the school, which often should be patterned off of the collection of those individual needs of students themselves. And so you'll see in the workbook, we provide ways in which you could think about gathering this information about your school and your student population itself. This may include data that is published publicly by the state or by your school or school district, allowing people to understand the performance of your students, the gaps that are there, or even some of the things that you know need to be addressed or even perhaps elevated as opportunities to see greater success with students in the future. And we also, in answering this kind of first question around student need, have included a scenario in the appendix A and B that allow you to understand how to use that context if you don't have access to your own data, for example. Also, we think that it's important to ask this question about what further information do you need to gather? So once you have a clear understanding of students' needs and the school's needs, there may be other contextual information that could be in your purview to think about and bring into this series of decisions about resource allocation. So these could be associated with the type of staff you have in the school. This could be associated with changes in those personnel, other community partners that could be contributing to the school improvement efforts, other factors that are happening in and around the school that could contribute to really kind of laying the foundation of thinking about how best to allocate your resources in pursuit of higher levels of student achievement for your students. And in particular, we want to be able to kind of leverage our business and operational functions in schools and more broadly in our school districts that allow you to focus on using those limited resources to drive student performance. And so there's a couple of benefits of that alignment in particular. And we talk about this in saying, of course, you want to identify your priorities and then align your resources to those things. But we feel it's really important to step back and offer a little bit of the why around this benefit. And in particular, this has grown over the course of the last decade or 15 years when we think about what we're learning in the field of school finance, the study basically of the way that resources and money impact outcomes and a whole variety of other system design elements in research. And in particular, two really big points here that we can think about why there is benefit of this alignment between your goals and priorities and the resources that you're making an investment and you're prioritizing to drive different actions and different strategies in your school. And in particular, this first one really says that the way that resources are used helps to determine how well students learn. So a growing body of research that really suggests that depending on the type of ways that you make a decision to invest those resources can determine how well students actually learn. And what that really underlies is this notion that the decisions that schools and school leaders and school communities are making can have a clear impact on how well students are learning, save any additional resource investment that are being made. Thereby, thinking about this notion of ensuring that resources are aligned to your priorities and goals is of the utmost importance to really back this idea of ensuring that students are getting the resources and the support and strategies they need to advance their learning. And that a key component of implementing any plan, but in particular of those within the school and educational environment, is thinking about the appropriate level of resources that are available to support the implementation of the plan. Meaning to say that it's important to consider when you're implementing a plan that you are judicious in the way that you think about the number of priorities, the way that you think about how those resources could be spread. And again, think of resources broadly, right? Not just the money that you're investing, but a lot of that money is buying people's time. 85 cents out of every dollar in public education generally goes to personnel. And those personnel are key constituents in helping to move actions and strategies in your school. And so when you think about the ability to implement or the ability to focus on certain types of priorities, it's critical to consider how many of those priorities you're funding and do you have sufficient resources to drive that priority to create that opportunity for better and higher levels of student learning in the future. So when we think about the leveraging both business and operations, it's critical to consider a couple things. First, that we think about planning, that aligning or identifying supportive strategies to those available resources is a critical component, right? You need to be able to understand and know and kind of paint the picture, paint the road that people are going to need to walk down in pursuit of these better outcomes for students. And so planning and identifying those strategies that are aligned to those available resources becomes critical in that process. Second, that the budgeting, so once you kind of set your plan, identified your strategies, that the budget itself, how you mobilize and monitor the use of those resources that have been set in place by the plan, is really critical. In particular, if there's something that happens kind of midway through the year, if there is some change, environmental or otherwise, that would impact the way that you think about the execution of that strategy relative to the plan, that the budget becomes a critical component in helping to shift, change, and mobilize those resources to shift along with the environment that's changing. We also think that it's critical to think about talent management. I was mentioning earlier that when we think about our financial resources, that a lot of the business that we are in public education is in a people business. And it is our adults, our professionals in the system, both individually and more importantly, collectively, that can really drive improvements that are happening in our system. And so considering the recruitment, selection, development, and I would also say the retention of staff to meet those improvement needs, especially when it's associated with high quality staff, is critically important for driving school improvement strategies and actions through a system. And finally, that we think about time. And next to the actual work of professionals in our systems, in our schools, and in our school districts, time is a precious asset and something that we have to think about in regards to where we want staff dedicating their time to students, how they're thinking about scheduling and ensuring that staff are devoting most of their time on those improvement priorities. They're building their own capacity, how they're working individually with students, how they're working together as adults and professionals to build that capacity to continually drive improvement in our schools. And so critically important amongst this conversation of how to think about the alignment of resources is to consider that the aim of this effort is really to think about what you see on the bottom part of this graphic, which is creating equitable systems that provide the right set of resources for the right type of situation that a student is encountering. And that what we're not aiming for is that everybody gets the same, which doesn't always work given how students come to us with their needs and how they come to us with their situations, but really to figure out what is the right way to accommodate where they are and then help them to accelerate through the system and improving their outcomes, both academic, social, or otherwise. And so really thinking about how do we determine the equitable way in which to think about the allocation of these resources. And I talked a bit before about the benefits of that alignment. And so when we think about this planning and the mission, the concept of thinking about what is our why becomes critically important in that it's not a place where you end, but a place of where you really start. So the why is and should be your foundational consideration of what is your purpose? What is your intent in running this school on behalf of these students? What are the outcomes that you intend to achieve? So that every other decision you make outside of the why, the how, the what, how you organize resources, how you organize adults associated with that, becomes rooted and anchored in that answer to your why. And it helps people to understand what you're about and what it is that you're aiming to achieve with those students themselves. So I've explained a little bit of this, but Simon Sinek, who came up with this concept of determining your why, I think really said it best. So we'll let him offer a little bit of his insight and thoughts on this. So I think just to wrap this up before we think about heading into part 2 of this series and scenarios is to, I think, reflect on a lot of what Simon Sinek discussed in that video about the celery test. And I think there's a couple of like really critical things that he said in that video that are important for us to take away in thinking about how best to align our resources to the priorities that we're establishing as a school. I think the first one that he talked about was really the practice, right? That being able to start small and establishing and saying out loud, what is your why? What are the things that are going to drive you as a leader in the school? Are efforts that will come over time. You're not going to master it in a moment, in a day, or even a week, but you need to spend some time kind of really thinking about how is it that I can express my why and attract other individuals into your circle or into your environment as a school that really drives and ultimately how to support students in getting better outcomes and better opportunities as they move and progress along their K-12 career. The second thing that I think was really important that Simon Sinek really talked about in that celery test video was that your why helps you to filter, right? In public education, there is a tremendous amount of really good research and really good evidence about what works. And they sit and they hit on just about every facet of the way that we might think about providing support to students as they grow and develop, both academically, emotionally, developmentally. And it's important to think about what Simon Sinek was saying in that establishing your why can help you to filter those things that are of the utmost importance to you. So one small example of this is if you thought it was really important as an elementary school principal to focus on the early years, because for you, your understanding of being able to accelerate progress for your student population and for the students that you were working with in the home and family environments in which they live, that it was important to really stay focused on accelerating their growth and development in early literacy. So say kindergarten, first and second grades, right? By being with a community and being with a team that is able to say that why out loud, it helps to filter away some of the priorities or other things that you might have otherwise funded in order to focus on accelerating the growth of those students in those early grades. So suddenly you have a filter through which you can look to understand how best to configure your resources, to configure the dollars you have available to you to ensure that that goal is accomplished as a priority within your school improvement plan in your school. I think that the last thing that Simon Sinek really talked about that I think was really important is that it does really start with you and you as a school leader. It doesn't mean that it ends with you, but by being able to say it out loud, that you are able to engage with others, it's able to attract other things into your sphere and into your consideration of how you want to think about tackling these problems at a school. And the more clear that you are about that why, the more clear you are about how you think about serving those students, the more clear you can be with a broader community, as close as your school leadership team, as broad as those community partners that want to support those students and children and families to accelerate and grow and succeed later on in life. And so really thinking about how best to articulate that why back to this notion of practice and how to practice over time and work with others to develop your why is really important. So as we gear up for kind of part 2 of this work, a couple things that you're going to need for this next segment, if you will. First, just make sure you have your kind of last benchmark or standardized assessment information that's available to you. Either will really do. I think the thing that we're really looking for here is that you have some sense of how your students are performing academically. I'd encourage you, if you have access to this information, to ensure that data is disaggregated by student groups. So think about your racial and ethnic student groups, think about socioeconomic status, English learner, students with disabilities, as a way to understand across these different measures, how are these students doing, not just from an overall perspective, but also from a disaggregated perspective. The second thing is that we want to make sure you bring your budget. And so in this case, this will vary depending on the school district context that you're in, the school context that you're in, but we want to be able to get access to as much of this budget information as possible so you get a full view of the types of personnel, the types of non-labor resources, the unrestricted resources, the restricted resources that you have access to, that really kind of offers as much of a menu of opportunity for you to think about how best to use those resources in alignment with your priorities, in alignment with your why, and where you're going as a school community. And associated with this, we think it's important to make sure that you have a list of staff and qualifications, as well as getting that of your kind of local school system as well. But with the staff and qualifications, think about some of the basics, right? So how many years they've been in the system, what their educational level is, if they have a specialization in a certain subject or in a certain grade or in a certain specialty with a certain population, such as a English learner population or a student with disability population. But also think about some of the other characteristics of those staff and qualifications, how long they've been in that school specifically, or how long they've been working with a certain grade level or subject level team. All of those considerations will come into play as you think about the best way to organize your resources that are aiming at your priorities for school improvement. And finally, we think it's important to make sure you bring together a list of programs and interventions that you currently have in place within your school. And these can be school-wide, they could be grade-specific or subject-specific, or cut across a certain type of students. But part of this inventory that we're wanting you to build is to bring together a full view and a full perspective of how to think about those set of programs and interventions, and that this information is really going to be used in your own data or scenario and the budget data in the workbook itself. So it'll be important to have that information. Hopefully that gives you some sense of the type of information we're hoping that you bring to your work in the workbook. And with that, we will move on and want to appreciate and thank you again on behalf of myself, and you'll hear a little bit from Amy later, and appreciate the opportunity to be able to work with you on this online webinar. Thanks and have a great day.
The Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement would like to thank you for participating in the Leadership Preparation virtual webinar series. We hope you found this particular webinar informative and beneficial to your work as you prepare as a leader. To access the webinar series and find additional resources, please visit the Maryland Resource Hub. The Maryland Resource Hub can be located at marylandresourcehub.com. That is MarylandResourcehub.com. We appreciate your feedback and would ask that you take a moment at this time to complete the SurveyMonkey link or use the QR code. The feedback that you provide to us will inform our work in the office as we develop additional resources to support you in the field. Again, thank you very much for your time in completing the feedback. As a reminder, the continuing professional development credits are available to you for this leadership preparation webinar series. To receive 1 credit, you will need to view 5 webinars, parts 1 and 2, and complete 3 hours of experience for the webinar. That would include the pre-work, viewing the webinar, and completing the participant's guide, as well as extension activities related to the webinar. To receive 2 CPD credits, you will watch all 10 webinars, parts 1 and 2, and complete 3 hours of experience per webinar. Again, it would include the pre-work, viewing the webinar and completing the participant's guide while watching, and extension activities related to the webinar. After you have completed the work, you will then submit all of the materials to the Google Form link listed. If you need to contact us with any questions for any reason at the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement, you can contact Ed Mitzel, Executive Director, at edmund.mitzel@maryland.gov. That is edmund.mitzel@maryland.gov. Or Dr. Lori Ellis, Coordinator for Leadership Development, at lori.ellis@maryland.gov. That is lori.ellis@maryland.gov.